ES10/L30, Revision 1. The President will now deliver a statement from the rostrum. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Decades ago, the situation in the Middle East marked the first significant crisis for the newly established United Nations. Since then, for almost the entire lifespan of this organization, peace in the region and for the people of Palestine in particular has remained elusive. Today, this untenable situation continues to deteriorate at alarming speed, bringing countless innocent victims into its deadly fold and pushing the region further to the brink of full-scale catastrophe. While numerous diplomatic efforts and the United Nations resolutions have been deployed, regrettably, none have yet quelled the current cycle of death and destruction. Yet this is not a moment for the international community to falter or to look away. If anything, the horrendous events of the last 7 months have only hastened the urgency of achieving a just, comprehensive, and lasting peaceful solution to the situation in the Middle East. Excellencies, today let us remember the legacy from which we hail. We stand proudly upon the shoulders of those who, many decades ago, recognized their ultimate responsibility to forge a peace that would banish the scourge and terror of war for many generations. Those who knew full well the undesirable role that war and violence played in their own lives, and who made no apologies for imagining and indeed building a more peaceful world beyond it. They understood the value of international cooperation and sought the active participation of all nations, large and small, giving voice to common principles on which they dared to anchor mankind's hopes for a better future. As today's United Nations, we cannot and must not lose sight of the history we inherit, or of the bold proposition that brought our organization into being: peace for all. I repeat, peace for all. Excellencies, this General Assembly is convoked today to pronounce itself within its powers and mandate and to uphold the functions and responsibilities bestowed upon it by the United Nations Charter, including under Article 4. I therefore call upon the membership to purposely assess the situation before us with nothing else in mind but a commitment to peace as our utmost ambition. Most immediately, I urge the parties to this conflict, with the support of those with leverage, to do their utmost to secure an agreement of ceasefire that would end the suffering end the bloodshed, free all hostages, protect innocent civilians, and ensure immediate, unhindered access of humanitarian aid without conditions. I repeat, without conditions for all who are in dire need. In closing, it is true that lost time is never found. It is also true that we have lost much time. We are here once again called upon to work for humanity, and we the peoples, without exception, to believe in the essential goodness of others, as Ralph Bunche put it decades ago, in the understanding that no problem of human relations is insoluble. I appeal to all member states to so comport themselves during this debate as to maintain the dignity of this chamber and of the organization. Ultimately, to help bring lasting peace, to save lives, and to end violence, to which we have all dedicated ourselves in the service of the people. I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates on behalf of the Arab Group to introduce draft resolution A/ES10/L30 revision 1.
سيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
أشكركم على سرعة الاستجابة لعقد هذه الجلسة الاستثنائية الطارئة المستأنفة للجمعية العامة بناء على طلب من المجموعة العربية ومنظمة التعاون الإسلامي وحركة عدم الانحياز. ويسرني بصفتي رئيس المجموعة العربية لشهر مايو أن أدلي بهذا البيان وأن أقدم مشروع القرار A/ES10/L30/Rev1 والذي يوصي في جوهره مجلس الأمن بإعادة النظر في طلب فلسطين الحصول على العضوية الكاملة في الأمم المتحدة. يأتي هذا المشروع بعد استخدام الولايات المتحدة حق النقد ضد مشروع القرار الذي تقدمت به دولة الجزائر لمجلس الأمن حول هذه المسألة الشهر الماضي نيابة عن المجموعة العربية. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، نحن اليوم أمام لحظة فارقة في التاريخ، فمشروع القرار المطروح أمامكم يمس مستقبل الشعب الفلسطيني بأكمله. شعب عانى من الاضطهاد والحرمان من أبسط الحقوق لأكثر من 75 عاما، ولا يزال ينتظر بصبر وثبات انتصار المجتمع الدولي لحقه في تقرير المصير ونيل دولته العضوية الكاملة في الأمم المتحدة. إن الشعب الفلسطيني المحب للسلام يستحق فرصة المساهمة بفعالية في خدمة الإنسانية عبر الأمم المتحدة. لقد أثبتت فلسطين من خلال حرصها على الانضمام للمعاهدات والاتفاقيات الدولية والتزامها بميثاق الأمم المتحدة ومن خلال استيفائها المعايير العضوية ونيلها اعتراف 144 دولة أنها تستحق مكانتها في الأسرة الدولية ولها الحق في العضوية الكاملة. إن الغالبية العظمى في هذه القاعة تدرك جيداً عدالة الطلبة الفلسطيني وعدالة قضيتهم التي تواجه اليوم مساع شرسة لطمسها وتصفيتها. ويتجلى هذا في محاولات التهجير القسري للشعب الفلسطيني ومصادرة أراضيه والتوسيع المستمر للمستوطنات مما يقطع أواصر الدولة الفلسطينية. ويضاف إلى ذلك الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية المدانة والمتواصلة على قطاع غزة وما يصاحبه من قتل ودمار، مع خطورة تفاقم الكارثة الإنسانية غير المسبوقة في ظل التصعيد الأخير في رفح. لقد ضربت إسرائيل كل القرارات الدولية بعرض الحائط، ووصل الحد بها إلى المصارحة جهرا برفض حل الدولتين وإنكار حق الشعب الفلسطيني في إعلان دولته المستقلة وذات السيادة. إننا كمجتمع دولي نتحمل مسؤولية الدفاع عن المرجعيات الدولية المتفق عليها لإنهاء هذا النزاع، وفي مقدمتها حل الدولتين على حدود 4 من يونيو لعام 1967. إن منح فلسطين العضوية الكاملة في الأمم المتحدة سيوجه رسالة قوية في هذا الشأن. كما أن التصويت لصالح مشروع القرار اليوم سيؤكد أن الإرادة الدولية أبت إلا أن تنتصر للحقوق المشروعة للشعوب وأن ترفض الازدواجية في المعايير. فهذا هو الدرع الحامي لدولنا في وجه النزاعات والأزمات التي يمر بها عالمنا اليوم. لقد تأخرت الأمم المتحدة في الوفاء بالتزاماتها التاريخية تجاه الشعب الفلسطيني، ولكن الوقت لم يفت بعد، فالشعب الفلسطيني أحوج ما يكون الآن لمثل هذا الدعم الأممي. إن كل دولة منكم لديها حرية الاختيار، وعليها أن تقرر كيف سيسجل التاريخ موقفها. فهل ستختارون الوقوف بجانب الحق والعدالة ومبادئ المساواة، الأسس التي قامت عليها الأمم المتحدة؟ هل ستدافعون عن نظام دولي قائم على سيادة القانون وحق الدول المشروع في العضوية الكاملة؟ هل ستنصرون شعباً عانى من الاحتلال والعدوان لأكثر من 7 عقود؟ وهل سنوجه اليوم لمجلس الأمن رسالة بأننا لن نتوقف عن المطالبة بحق فلسطين في العضوية الكاملة، وأنه مطالب بالاستجابة لإرادة المجتمع الدولي؟ سيد الرئيس، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، إن مشروع القرار اليوم واضح، وكما ذكرنا فهو يوصي مجلس الأمن بإعادة النظر في عضوية فلسطين الكاملة ودعم طلبها، وذلك في ظل إقرار الجمعية العامة بإهلية دولة فلسطين والفتوى الاستشارية لمحكمة العدل الدولية الصادرة في 28 من مايو لعام 1948، وبما يتوافق تماما مع المادة الرابعة من ميثاق الأمم المتحدة. ومع ذلك لا يشكل هذا القرار بحد ذاته إنصافاً لدولة فلسطين، حيث أنها وإن منحت حقوقاً إضافية تبقى دولة مراقبة لا تتمتع بحق التصويت في الجمعية العامة أو الترشح لهيئات الأمم المتحدة. ولذلك نطالب مجلس الأمن بالاستجابة للجمعية العامة، بيتنا الجامع، وللأغلبية الساحقة من المجتمع الدولي، وأن يرفع توصية إيجابية بشأن عضوية دولة فلسطين حتى يتسنى للجمعية العامة اتخاذ قرار بانضمامها للأمم المتحدة. ويؤكد مشروع القرار أيضا على حق الشعب الفلسطيني غير القابل للتصرف في تقرير المصير، بما في ذلك حقه في استقلال وسيادة دولته. ويدعو إلى تجديد الجهود الدولية للتوصل دون تأخير إلى إنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الذي بدأ عام 1967 والتوصل إلى تسوية عادلة ودائمة وسلمية لقضية فلسطين. أن تبني هذا القرار سيمثل خطوة تاريخية نحو تصحيح الظلم الذي عانى منه الشعب الفلسطيني على مدى عقود، وسيعزز مكانة فلسطين ومشاركتها في المحافل الدولية. أما التصويت ضد هذا القرار فسيكون بمثابة تخل عن المسؤولية الأخلاقية والقانونية تجاه القضية الفلسطينية، وقد يفسر على أنه ضوء أخضر لإسرائيل لمواصلة انتهاكاتها التي تقوض حل الدولتين. ولهذا تناشد المجموعة العربية كل الدول المحبة للسلام والمدافعة عن حقوق الدول المشروعة أن تصوت لصالح هذا القرار. وأخيراً، وبينما تستمر الجهود الجبارة لجمهورية مصر العربية ودولة قطر للتوصل إلى وقف فوري ودائم لإطلاق النار في غزة، تؤكد المجموعة العربية ضرورة سعي المجتمع الدولي لإيجاد أفق سياسي جاد لإعادة إطلاق عملية تفاوضية تسهم في تحقيق السلام العادل والشامل للشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق وفقاً لمبادرات السلام العربية وغيرها من المرجعيات الدولية. Mr. President, before I conclude, I kindly request that you suspend the debate at 11 a.m. this morning to proceed to take action on draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1, given the importance of the matter, with the understanding that the debate would resume immediately after the vote on the draft resolution, and that the 10th emergency session would be temporarily adjourned after the conclusion of the debate. I thank you, Mr. President.
The representative of the United Arab Emirates has moved that the debate on agenda item 5 be suspended at 11 a.m. today for the Assembly to proceed to consideration of the draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1, and that the debate would continue after the action on the draft resolution. It is my understanding that, without setting a precedent, if the Assembly were to decide to suspend the debate at 11 a.m. today, to proceed to consideration of draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1 and to continue the debate after the action on the draft resolution, and if the Assembly were to subsequently adopt the draft resolution, the 10th emergency special session would be adjourned temporarily following the conclusion of the debate on item 5. Is there any objection to the motion? I hear no objection. It is so decided. I now give the floor to the observer state of Palestine.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I stand before you as lives continue falling apart in the Gaza Strip, torn apart in the most brutal and devastating ways. I stand before you as more than 35,000 Palestinians have been killed, 80,000 have been maimed, 2 million have been displaced, and everything has been destroyed. No words can capture what such loss and trauma signifies for Palestinians, their families, communities, and for our nation as a whole. As Palestinians in Gaza have been pushed to the very edge of the Strip, to the very brink of life, and in the ever-narrowing space they are besieged in, bombs and bullets continue hunting them down. I stand before you as famine is settling in, by design and by the decision of the Israeli government, killing the most vulnerable among our people, children and women. Israel closed the crossings instead of opening them, including the Rafah crossing, seizing by force the Palestinian crossings point of Rafah. Humanitarian convoys were attacked with its blessing, and the UNRWA headquarters was assaulted with its complicity. At the time where the world was calling to flood Gaza with humanitarian aid and calling for a ceasefire, Israel imposed a drought. Its plan has not changed: destroy and displace. I stand before you as every inch of Gaza has witnessed massacres, as mass graves continue to be uncovered where hospitals used to stand, as the world is barely starting to grasp the cruel and extensive nature of the actions committed against the Palestinian people. I stand before you as the Israeli Prime Minister is ready to kill thousands more to ensure his political survival, as he openly declares the Palestinian state is an existential threat, and together with his co-conspirators continues, 76 years after the Nakba, to try and finish the job. Israel's war is against the Palestinian people as a whole. Its occupation forces and settlers kill daily in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Its bulldozers displace Palestinian communities and demolish Palestinian homes everywhere. I have heard many praise the resilience of the Palestinian people, and we are resilient. But no nation, no family, no person should have to endure such suffering for so long. Such injustice, from birth to premature death, one generation after the other. No parents should know such fear, such powerlessness. No children should have to suffer in their flesh what Palestinian children are experiencing. As we speak, 1.4 million Palestinians in Rafah wonder if they will survive today and wonder where to go next. There is nowhere left to go. Mr. President, I have stood hundreds of times before at this podium, often in tragic circumstances, but none comparable to the ones my people endure today. I have stood hundreds of times before at this podium, but never for a more significant vote than the one about to take place, a historic one. We faced and continue to face attempts to push us out of geography and out of history, but by forcible displacement, subjugation, or death, or to say it in even clearer terms, by ethnic cleansing, apartheid, or genocide. Against all odds, we survived. Our flag flies high and proud in Palestine and across the globe and on the campus of Columbia University. It has become a symbol raised by all those who believe in freedom and is just rule, by all those who can no longer stand idly by in the face of such utter injustice. It is true that we will not disappear, but the lives lost cannot be restored. The marks, visible and invisible, left by this horrific assault that has yet to end on bodies and souls, on families and communities, on each single Palestinian in the Gaza Strip can never be truly conveyed. We did not write the UN Charter. We did not enact international law. We just demanded to see them applied to us, and have been until now denied their protection. As the campaign to displace and destroy the Palestinian people reaches its ultimate levels, you can decide to stand by the right of a nation to live in freedom and dignity on its ancestral land, to stand with peace, which requires the recognition of our rights, not their continued denial. Or you can stand on the sidelines of history, or worst, obstruct its natural path forward. Mr. President, I have sat in these halls next to liberation movements who, one by one, finally took their rightful place in this august chamber, and again, without a doubt, the day will come where Palestine will take its rightful place among the community of free nations. Occupation and colonialism and death and destructions are not our fate. They are imposed on us, but freedom is our sole destiny. We share with many nations represented in this hall the suffering they endured, the struggles they led, the dreams they had. You have been witnesses to the story of Palestine, and you can only look at it from the prism of your own people's journeys towards liberation. Liberation so life can prevail. Liberation so peace can prevail. We want peace. We want freedom. There is no word harder to pronounce when tens of thousands of your people have been killed. We do not use it lightly. We want peace. Our freedom is not an obstacle to peace. It is the only path leading to it. If you do not support our freedom, you do not support peace. Our right to self-determination, to independent statehood, to membership of these United Nations cannot be subject to an Israeli veto. They are not up for negotiations. They are our inherent rights as Palestinians. Israel is clear that it wants to destroy Palestinian statehood. What does it mean to be for the two-state solution if you allow for the destruction of the Palestinian state? Mr. President, dear colleagues, dear brothers and sisters, dear friends, Palestine has been for generations of your compatriots the ultimate test for humanity's ability to live up to its promises. And it is once again for this generation the ultimate measure of the quest for justice. Its name was embraced by your founding fathers and your greatest leaders and by our peoples. It is an integral part of the legacy of your ancestors and of the engagement of your younger generations. People from all creeds and faiths and race and age, in the biggest cities and in the most remote villages, are mobilizing for Palestine, mobilizing for a ceasefire, for an end of the occupation, for freedom and justice, and for peace. Mr. President, the UN Charter was often invoked during our negotiations, and we will always abide by the Charter, including when the processes it forces and limitations it imposes are to our detriment, and including after having been confined in an observer status for 50 years now. We wish from all those who invoked the Charter to abide by the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination guaranteed by the Charter, to confront the acquisition of Palestinian territory by force, denounced by the Charter, to preserve future Palestinian generations from the scourge of occupation and war as foreseen by the Charter. A yes vote is a vote for Palestinian existence. It is not against any state, but it is against the attempts to deprive us of our state. That is why the Israeli government is so opposed to it, because they oppose our independence and the two-state solution altogether. It is an investment in peace and thus empowers the forces of peace. How can anyone explain that Israel was admitted to the United Nations 75 years ago on the power of a resolution that foresaw two states, and without awaiting an end of the conflict, and while continuing to deny our rights and our existence, and that the state of Palestine, 75 years later, is still required to wait and remains met by a closed door, preventing it from being admitted to this organization. Your vote today, of course, says a lot about your solidarity with Palestine, but also about who you are and what you stand for. It matters, and I know an overwhelming majority of you will stand again with the Palestinian people in their hour of need, and you will stand for just and lasting peace for the benefit of all. In simple words, voting yes is the right thing to do, and I can assure you, you and your country for years to come will be proud to have stood for freedom, justice, and peace in this darkest hour. As everyone is saying, free Palestine, and peace for all. And I repeat, free Palestine, and vote yes for the resolution, and I thank you so much.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Over 85 years ago, as World War II began, a force of sheer evil rose up with the goal of dominating the planet through genocide and destruction. After Hitler's rise to power, the Nazis sought to subjugate humanity under their iron fist while annihilating the Jewish people, but not only us, all those who they deemed subhuman. But in the face of this genocidal plot, the forces of good came together in order to end this horror, to return freedom and peace to the world. And following the Allies' victory, this institution here, the United Nations, was founded with the mission of ensuring such tyranny never raises its ugly head again, never. Today, you are about to do the exact opposite and advance the establishment of a Palestinian terror state which will be led by the Hitler of our times. The Hitler of our times. In the 1940s, the world united to destroy a murderous regime. Yet today, with sick and twisted irony, the very body established to prevent evil is now welcoming a terror state into its ranks. What would Churchill say if he were alive today? What would Roosevelt think? They are turning in their graves, turning in their graves. This week, only this week, Israel commemorated Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And it is during our sacred week that this shameless body has chosen to reward modern-day Nazis with rights and privileges. As Israelis mourn the Jewish babies burned in the crematoria, you here at the UN usher in the collaborators of the Israeli babies burned on October 7th. How can you be so blind? Is it your political interest? Are these your distorted values? Are you being threatened by diplomatic terror of the Palestinians and their collaborators? There are many here. Colleagues, today's destructive vote is not only opening the UN's doors to the terror-supporting Palestinian Authority. If it was, then it would be bad enough. But as you all know, the Palestinian Authority does not even have control of its own territory. Do you know who controls Gaza? You probably have forgotten, because in all of your resolutions here since October 7th, you have failed to even call them out by name. So I'll remind you, it's the terrorists of Hamas. But Hamas doesn't only control Gaza. Hamas has also taken over Palestinian neighborhoods, Palestinian villages in Judea and Samaria, what you call the West Bank. In every poll, Hamas today is predicted to win Palestinian elections, if they ever happen. So today, the General Assembly is not only about to grant the rights of a state to the Palestinian Terror Authority. Today you are also about to grant privileges and rights to the future terror state of Hamas. You have opened up the United Nations to modern-day Nazis, to genocidal jihadists committed to establishing an Islamic state across Israel and the region, murdering every Jewish man, woman, and child. It makes me sick. Sick. In the years to come, you will have to explain how, in opposition to all morality and the UN Charter, you did everything to give a state to a group of mass murderers, to the Hitlers of our times. So here it is. I present to you the future outcome of today's vote. This is the outcome of your vote. Soon to be President Yihya Sinwar, President Tyrant of the state of Hamas, sponsored by the UN, by the way. And he owes his deepest gratitude to you, the General Assembly. When Hamas rises to power, the Palestinian representative who just spoke here, you know what will happen to him. He will be recalled. And if he returns, he will likely be thrown off a rooftop by Hamas, just as the Palestinian Authority representative were when Hamas took over Gaza back in 2006-07. And in his place, this body will welcome a Hamas representative to its ranks, a terrorist diplomat whose stated goal is Jewish genocide, just like his Iranian counterpart here. With this new precedent, we may see here representatives of ISIS or Boko Haram that will sit among us. You know what? This will be fitting for the new moral standard being set here today, giving the rights of a state to an entity that is already partially controlled by terrorists and will be replaced by a force of child-murdering Hamas rapists. Unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. What you are carrying out today is reminiscent of how the powers of Europe capitulated to Hitler in the Munich Agreement. The UN is targeting the law-abiding democracy of Israel while appeasing the Nazi jihadist forces of Hamas in Iran. And Churchill's remarks then on the choice of cowardice and appeasement in the face of murderous dictators are relevant to your vote today. Because today you have a choice between weakness, shame, and conciliation, and fighting a war against terror. And sadly, you will choose weakness, but you will receive in return not only shame, but war in the future as well. Bravo. Colleagues, today another travesty is being committed here by the General Assembly, an unforgivable act, the destruction of the United Nations Charter. The UN Charter, the sacred document which serves as the foundation of everything we are supposed to do here, is being trampled upon. It is being thrown out the window. You are spitting on the very values that were formulated to bind this organization. With today's destructive resolution, you are circumventing the Security Council, ignoring its decision, and violating the norms this organization has abided by. The Charter was drafted for a reason, but most of you care nothing for the qualifications it outlines. So let me remind you what the Charter says about admitting new UN membership. Membership in the United Nations is open to all other peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present Charter, peace-loving. Number two, the admission of any such state to membership in the United Nations will be affected by a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. With today's vote, you are not only bypassing the Security Council in violation of the Charter, but you are bastardizing the meaning of peace-loving. You know that the Palestinians are the exact opposite of peace-loving. You know this. Since they rejected the UN partition plan in 1947, they rejected it. They have only tried to destroy Israel time and again. They are terror-loving, not peace-loving. They are anything but peace-loving. The Palestinian Authority pays lifelong salaries to terrorists. It's in their budget. They teach martyrdom and jihad in their classrooms. They glorify death and murder. The Palestinians indoctrinate their children to murder Israelis and commit terror attacks. And then, when Israel defends herself, the Palestinian representative stands here, shedding his crocodile tears, as if he did not send all of them to commit suicide or terror attacks. Not a single Palestinian leader, not even one, has condemned the October 7th massacre. He calls the Hamas his brothers. And this is who you want to bestow the rights of a state upon? A terror entity? As long as so many of you are Jew-hating, you don't really care that the Palestinians are not peace-loving. Despite your obligation to the UN Charter, you are here today to expose what the Charter truly means to you. When it comes to the lives of Israelis and Jews, the UN Charter means nothing to you. Nada, kaput. By ignoring the Charter and granting the Palestinians the privileges of a member state, you are proving that morality is just a slogan for you, while politics and interest prevail. To you, the UN Charter is just a meaningless document, and the vote today will prove that. You know what you're doing today? Today you are gutting the Charter, and you are doing it in the wake of the most brutal massacre of my people since the Holocaust, on the ashes of the October 7th massacre. Why? This day will go down in infamy. The UN, an organization that was established in the aftermath of the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, pays no heed to its founding charter and is advancing another genocidal regime that threatens the existence of the Jewish people. And I want the entire world to remember this moment, to remember this immoral act. So today, I will hold up a mirror for you. A mirror. This is your mirror. So that you can see exactly what you are inflicting upon the UN Charter with this destructive vote. This is you are shredding the UN Charter with your own hands. Yes, that's what you're doing, shredding the UN Charter. Shame on you. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel. In light of the decision taken by the General Assembly earlier today to suspend the debate on Agenda Item 5 at 11 a.m., the Assembly shall now proceed to consider Draft Resolution A/ES10/L30 Revision 1. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Thank you, Mr. President. I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to the delegations listed on the L document, the following countries have also become co-sponsors of A/ES10/L30 Revision 1. Afghanistan, Algeria, Angola, Azerbaijan, Bahamas, Belgium, Botswana, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Burkina Faso, Cambodia, Chile, China, Comoros, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Dominican Republic, Eritrea, Honduras, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Lao People's Democratic Republic, Mauritius, Mozambique, Nigeria, Norway, Peru, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, Somalia, Spain, Sri Lanka, Suriname, Tajikistan, Thailand, Trinidad and Tobago, Turkey, the United Republic of Tanzania, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe. If any other countries wish to co-sponsor AES 10/L30 Revision 1, please signify by pressing the microphone button. Antigua and Barbuda, Niger, that's it, Mr. President. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation.
President, 7 months ago, another escalation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict began. We won't dwell on its horrific consequences that it has had so far. We'll simply say that over this time, as a result of the Israeli military operation, more than 35,000 people have died in Gaza alone, many of them women and children, and another 78,000 civilians have been injured. This monstrously tragic statistic has nothing comparable to it in modern history. If Israel goes ahead with its plan to assault Rafah, where more than 1.5 million people have congregated who fled from all corners of Gaza, catastrophe will be destroyed. Practically all civilian infrastructure, including schools and hospitals, have been destroyed. These evaluations of the catastrophic situation in Gaza is something that's shared by the vast majority of the international community, which we can see here for ourselves today. President, the tragic situation on the ground reaffirms the position of our country and the vast majority of the international community about the need for, alongside efforts for a ceasefire, to not forget about the importance of creating the conditions for direct dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis on a whole host of final status issues. The outcome of this process should be the implementation of the two-state formula approved by the international community, Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. For this dialogue to succeed, Israel and Palestine need to be on equal footing vis-à-vis Security Council decisions. Inter alia, it is our common duty to redress the historic injustice regarding the aspirations of the Palestinian people to their own sovereign and contiguous state, something that should have been adopted at the UN in 1948. We are convinced that fully fledged membership of Palestine of the UN would help provide an equal initial negotiating position with Israel, who received this fully fledged status more than 75 years ago. Indeed, admission of the State of Palestine to the UN would be a first practical step towards a fair resolution to the Palestinian question at a UN-approved platform underpinned by generally recognized international legal foundations. This was the focus of Algeria's draft resolution submitted to the Security Council. However, on the 18th of April, the whole world bore witness to yet another fifth US veto who blocked the Palestinian application for UN membership. This spike of violence in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict shows what tragic consequences can arise from attempts to monopolize mediation functions and efforts of one country to depict itself as the world's police. President, after the US blocking of the work of the Security Council on the Palestinian-Israeli file as a whole and on the mission of Palestine as a fully fledged member of the UN, specifically, a very unfortunate and unusual situation has arisen, and it requires unusual solutions to it. Therefore, before us today, there is a far from standard draft resolution. Many of its elements are being considered for the first time by the General Assembly and would normally require more detailed study in any other case. However, they pertain to providing further rights not to some hopeful, but to Palestine, who, because of the US position, has had to be satisfied by merely being a permanent observer to the United Nations. And it would remain as such after the adoption of this draft. However, they would receive other opportunities, further opportunities for more effectively participate in the work of the UN General Assembly and part of the meetings held under its aegis. We see here an opportunity to impartially address the historic injustice towards the long-suffering Palestinian people who have, over the last 7 months, lost an unprecedented number of their civilians. The consequences of the actions of Israel, covered for by the United States, will be felt for many years. And to overcome them, Palestinians need to be maximally involved in the work of UN specialized bodies. Today's draft seeks to provide as much assistance to this as possible. We don't underscore that this is not an ideal draft inter alia. We believe that the draft resolution did not mention the occupying powers of the United States. However, underscore that this decision is a one-off and does not set, as shown in the text of the draft, a precedent. We intend to vote in support of this document in memory of those Palestinian civilians who, because of the inability of the international community and the UN to stop the bloodshed, did not live long enough to see Palestine's admission as a fully fledged member of our organization. We call on those who are not indifferent to their fate and to fight for their rights to do the same. However, it's crucial to understand that adoption of this resolution does not replace the main task here, which must be addressed very soon. Palestine must become a fully permanent member of the UN. The recommendation to the Security Council in the draft to once again consider the application of Palestine for UN membership is something we deem to be its most important element. It is a moral duty of everyone. Only fully fledged membership will allow Palestine to stand alongside other members of the organization and fully enjoy the rights that this status implies. Before this, the path set forth in the UN Charter still needs to be followed. We hope that this time the US, who today has had every opportunity to see for themselves the vast support of the international community, will not block at the Security Council a positive decision to this question, and will soon at the UN General Assembly, the GA will be able to consider, upon a positive recommendation of the Council, a draft resolution on the admission of Palestine to the UN family. The Palestinian people have long merited this. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Russian Federation for its statement, and I now invite the delegation of Pakistan to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've asked for the floor to explain Pakistan's vote on the draft resolution contained in document A/ES10/L30/Rev1, submitted by the United Arab Emirates on behalf of the co-sponsors. Pakistan fully supports the draft resolution. We did not co-sponsor the draft at the request of the State of Palestine in order to be able to respond to adverse moves against this draft. Mr. President, it is clear that we are meeting in the shadows of the gravest crimes committed and the gravest violations of the principles of the UN Charter since the Holocaust during the Second World War. The distinguished representative of Palestine has described more eloquently than I could of the slaughter and devastation that has been visited on Gaza by an outlaw Israeli regime. Israel has refused the calls by this Assembly, by the Security Council, and even by its patrons and friends, to halt the massacre of innocents and accept an immediate ceasefire. The Israeli leadership has reneged on negotiated deals for a ceasefire. It has now initiated its assault on Rafah, which the UN Secretary General has rightly warned, and I quote, would be a strategic mistake, a political calamity, and a humanitarian nightmare, unquote. Indeed, there will come a day when Israel will be held accountable for crimes that it is committing in Palestine, especially in Gaza today. And we shall work towards holding Israel and its leadership accountable for these crimes. Yet what we have heard today are insults. Insults hurled at the United Nations, at this assembly, and at its member states. This is the arrogance of the aggressor. It reflects the impunity of the occupier of a land for over 70 years, trampling the inherent and charter-given right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. And we hope that the Assembly will appropriately respond to such insults, because I think it is contrary to the expectations of a member state and to the standards and practices of the United Nations. Mr. President, today the General Assembly is asked to take a first step towards a final settlement of the conflict, an important step to rectify the historic injustice against the Palestinian people. It was as a result of this Assembly's vote in 1947 that Palestine was partitioned between Israel and a Palestinian state. Yet only Israel is a member of the United Nations. The Palestinian people have been denied their right to self-determination since 1947. And after 1967, they have been obliged to live under Israel's brutal occupation. This General Assembly can partially redress this historic injustice by admitting Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. It meets all the criteria of membership. Its membership enjoys the support of the vast majority of the UN member states. It is regrettable, therefore, that Palestine's membership has been blocked in 2011 and again 2 weeks ago by the negative vote of one permanent member of the Security Council. The assertion that Palestine's admission can happen only through negotiations reflects the inequity of this position. Negotiations must have a level playing field. If Israel is negotiating as a full member of the United Nations, so too should Palestine. Mr. President, the adoption of the draft resolution contained in document L30 Rev 1 will determine, I am sure with the near unanimous support of member states, that Palestine is qualified for membership. It will urge the Security Council to reconsider and endorse the admission of Palestine as a full member state. In the meantime, the General Assembly will accord all the rights
for the fullest possible participation of the State of Palestine in the General Assembly and other UN organs and conferences. This exceptional measure applies only to Palestine and does not constitute a precedent, as the resolution states. The adoption of this resolution will be a partial yet vital step towards redressing the historic injustice against the people of Palestine. It will reflect a political reality which would facilitate the revival of a peace process to realize the universally agreed objective of creating a two-state solution, the objective of establishing a viable and contiguous Palestinian state along the 4 June 1967 borders with Al-Quds as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan for his statement. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before the vote. Before proceeding to take a decision on draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1, I wish to address the question concerning the majority required for the adoption of the draft resolution. In light of Article 18, paragraphs 2 and 3 of the Charter of the United Nations, is there any objection to taking action on draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1 by a two-thirds majority of the members present and voting? I see no objection. The two-thirds majority of members present and voting is therefore required for the adoption of draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1. The General Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1 entitled Admission of New Members to the United Nations. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Revision 1, please signify. Those against and abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Revision 1, entitled Admission of New Members to the United Nations. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 143. Against, 9. Abstentions, 25. Draft resolution A/ES10/L30/Rev1 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the delegation of Singapore.
President, the General Assembly has just adopted an important resolution expressing support for Palestine's membership in the United Nations and recommending that the Security Council reconsider this matter favorably. Singapore voted in favor of this resolution after serious and careful consideration. I'd like to explain and place on record the reasons for Singapore's support for this resolution. First, Singapore's support for this resolution is a vote in favor of a negotiated two-state solution at a critical juncture in a very troubled region. Singapore has consistently advocated for and supported a negotiated two-state settlement consistent with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions as the only viable path for achieving a comprehensive, just, and durable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Both Israel and Palestine have the right to exist and to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries, free from threats or acts of force. Singapore joins the rest of the international community in calling on leaders of both sides to show leadership and courage and take the difficult but necessary steps towards a two-state solution. The prospect for peace between Israel and Palestine have become even bleaker, and this is precisely why we must do everything possible to cease hostilities and revive efforts to work towards a two-state solution. The heinous terrorist attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October last year brutally killed over 1,200 Israelis and other nationalities, with the taking of more than 200 hostages, many of whom remain in captivity. These attacks cannot be condoned or justified by any history of injustice, enmity, or conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and Singapore has repeatedly condemned them. In response, Israel has exercised its legitimate right of self-defense, but Israel's military actions have gone too far and caused far too much human suffering and property destruction. The death of around 35,000 Palestinians and the humanitarian disaster in Gaza is tragic. The result of these events has been outrage on both sides, breakdown of the fragile trust between both peoples, and the shattering of any sense of security for both Israelis and Palestinians. As a friend of both sides, we are deeply grieved by this state of affairs. Singapore's vote today reflects our heartfelt desire to see both parties resume direct negotiations in good faith, demonstrating courage to take the tremendously difficult but essential first steps towards a two-state solution and a durable peace. We recognize that this will be a painful and long-drawn process. The work to rebuild trust and restart dialogue must begin now. Both sides have legitimate rights and shared responsibilities, and difficult compromises must be struck through direct negotiations. Secondly, Singapore's support for the resolution is in line with our consistent and long-standing support for the principles of international law and the implementation of all relevant UN resolutions. The General Assembly Resolution 181, amongst other things, divided the mandate of Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. The UN Security Council Resolutions 242 and 338 called for the withdrawal of Israel's armed forces from territories occupied in the Six-Day War. Subsequent resolutions have referred explicitly to a two-state solution. Unfortunately, these resolutions have never been implemented. Thirdly, we support the right of the Palestinian people to a homeland. In 1988, Singapore welcomed the Palestinian Liberation Organization's proclamation of the State of Palestine. We did so in the context of a two-state solution. At that time, the Palestine National Council had expressed support for an international conference in accordance with UNSC Resolutions 242 and 338. Most importantly, the PLO explicitly rejected terrorism and recognize the right of the State of Israel to exist. We saw these moves as progress towards a durable solution for this long-standing conflict. Fourthly, in supporting this resolution we adopted today, Singapore reiterates that terrorism has no place in any process leading to a stable and peaceful political solution. Groups, including Hamas, that continue to deny Israel's existence or refuse to renounce terrorism have no place in a Palestinian state. To create the foundations for a lasting peace, we must restore hope and offer the possibility of peace as an alternative to the endless cycle of violence and retribution. As a friend of both Israel and Palestine, we urge both sides to eschew violence and resume negotiations towards a two-state solution with the help and support of the international community. Mr. President, notwithstanding our support in favor of the resolution, Singapore reserves its position on the scope of the annex to the resolution. In our view, any additional rights and privileges to be granted under the resolution must be granted in a manner that is entirely consistent with the UN Charter. This is important, not only in this case, but also for similar future cases, because the UN Charter, which binds member states, provides for the exercise of certain rights and obligations only by member states. I thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore. Before giving the floor to the next speaker, may I call upon all participants to keep their voices down so that we can listen to statements. I now offer the floor to the delegation of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. 77 years ago, in this assembly, Denmark voted in favor of establishing two states in the former mandate of Palestine. Today's vote is an expression of Denmark's continued commitment to the realization of a two-state solution, a peaceful, lasting, and sustainable solution where the State of Israel and an independent State of Palestine can live side by side in peace and security. Denmark has consistently stood by Israel and its inherent right to self-defense in accordance with international law. We have also supported the Palestinian right to statehood and the building of the Palestinian Authority, and we continue to do so. 12 years ago, Denmark voted in favor of granting Palestine status as a non-member observer state to the United Nations. Our vote today is a natural continuation hereof and an important step towards Palestinian membership of the United Nations. At the same time, Denmark's vote today does not entail formal bilateral recognition of a sovereign Palestinian state. This is a separate question which we'll continue to consider within the framework set out by international law. It is the position of Denmark that such recognition should happen as a result of a two-state solution negotiated between the parties. Mr. President, after 7 months of devastating conflict, the political horizon towards a two-state solution can seem far into the distance, but we must never lose sight of this common goal. Hopefully today's vote can be a step in that direction. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Denmark, and I now invite the distinguished delegate of the Islamic Republic of Iran to take the floor.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran expressed its support for Palestine's full membership in the United Nations. The admission of Palestine as a full member of the UN is a first step and pivotal moment in addressing the historical injustice endured by the Palestinian people. We reiterate the operative paragraph 1 of the resolution just adopted, upon which the General Assembly determines that the State of Palestine is qualified for membership in the United Nations in accordance with Article 4 of the Charter, which means it is a peace-loving state, is able and willing to carry out the obligations of the Charter and should therefore be admitted to membership in the United Nations. The Islamic Republic of Iran acknowledged and supports the General Assembly decision today. The decision represents a modest yet crucial step in fulfilling the international community's obligation toward the people of Palestine and restoring some of Palestinians' inherent rights. Palestine has demonstrated its commitment to peace and its ability to fulfill the obligation on the UN Charter. Consequently, it deserves full membership in the United Nations. Conversely, the Israeli regime's actions disqualify and render this regime ineligible as a peace-loving entity capable of holding the UN Charter's obligations. The Israeli regime consistently violates international law, the UN Charter and UN resolutions. It refused to comply with the legally binding orders of International Court of Justice and persists in egregious violation, including massacre, war crimes, crime against humanity, and act of genocide. The appalling reports of mass graves discovered in the Nasser and Ash-Shafa medical facilities in Gaza paint a harrowing picture of the war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by this regime. Approximately 400 bodies, including women and children, were found buried, serving as a stark example of the regime's brutality and disregard for human life. These actions run counter to the fundamental value of the United Nations and all basic norms and principles of international law and threaten international peace and security. We regret that the United States has obstructed the draft press statement of Security Council proposed by Algeria, which calls for an impartial, transparent, and international investigation. This responsible behavior by US is unacceptable, reckless, and contradicts the international community's will. Mr. President, despite the overwhelming support by the international community, the US, as a staunch supporter of the occupying regime, has once more chosen to blind its eye to the reality and made cynical efforts to hinder the realization of the noble aspiration of Palestinian people for full membership. However, today's vote shows how the United States is isolated in its unconditional support of the Israeli regime. We trust that today's vote sends a clear message to the Security Council. Upon the adoption of this resolution, we hope that the Security Council will be able to reconsider its previous stance regarding the Palestinian request for full membership. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran firmly believes that support for the cause of Palestine and Palestinian people must continue until they can realize their fundamental rights, in particular their right to self-determination and the establishment of an independent state of Palestine in all occupied territories with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. As we have stated before, we are of the view that the return of Palestinian refugees to their homeland and the holding of a referendum on the self-determination represents the most effective and durable solution to the Palestinian question. Through a referendum, Palestinian Muslims, Jews, and Christians will be able to choose their own political system and enjoy their right fairly and equally. In conclusion, my delegation voted in favor of the resolution and consider it as a demonstration of international community's strong support for the cause of Palestine, particularly the Palestinian people's realization of their inalienable right to self-determination. While we welcome the adoption of the resolution, our hearts go out to the people of Gaza and Rafah, who endure the ongoing atrocities committed by Israel. Iran remains steadfast in advocating for the establishment of a sustainable ceasefire, recognizing it as an urgent and indispensable requirement of the Gaza well-being at this critical juncture. Finally, we would like to put on record that our support for the resolution is without prejudice to our long-standing and constant principled position on issues related to the question of Palestine and the non-recognition of Israeli regime. I thank you, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I now invite the representative of Czechia to take the floor.
Mr. President, let me right at the outset reiterate Czechia's full support for the people of the West Bank and Gaza in their pursuit of political aspirations for their own future statehood. For this to be viable, however, it must be a result of a comprehensive peace agreement guaranteeing security, political stability, and democratic development for both Israel and Palestine. First and foremost, addressing the deep humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a matter of great urgency, as it is a critical element in any meaningful process leading to the future Palestinian state. Indeed, parts of the Strip are still under the control of Hamas, which launched its horrific terrorist attack on Israel on the 7th of October, triggering this war and resulting in its tragic consequences for thousands of civilians. We strongly support the joint statement issued by the 18 member states' leaders on the 25th of April, which calls on Hamas to immediately release all hostages and pave the way for a ceasefire. Mr. President, today we voted on a draft resolution that seeks to enhance the Palestinian status at the United Nations after its application for a full UN membership was not recommended by the Security Council. The people in the region deserve the prospect of a peaceful solution that will permanently resolve the conflict. But neither the UN membership nor the enhanced rights at the United Nations alone can bring peace and prosperity to the Palestinians. Achieving peace requires more. It requires courage to come together at the negotiating table and make difficult political decisions and compromises. And that is actually what we should all strive for. In this regard, it is vital to reestablish a political horizon towards a two-state solution. A negotiated agreement remains the only viable path to achieving lasting security and peace for all. We also encourage the region to embark on a path of cooperation, including through the Abraham Accords, to foster a better future for the Middle East. This General Assembly resolution intends to bypass a highly complex political process through a decision that could potentially sow further divisions and hinder peace talks in an already very fragile conflict situation. Furthermore, it attempts to circumvent the established legal procedures for admission of new members to the United Nations family by awarding rights and privileges of a member state to an observer. This is in contradiction with the intention of the UN Charter. Mr. President, precisely for these reasons, Czechia was not in a position to support the draft resolution, and we voted no. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Czechia, and I now invite the representative of the United States to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. President Biden has been clear that sustainable peace in the region can be achieved only through a two-state solution, with Israel's security guaranteed, where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side with equal measures of freedom and dignity. It remains the U.S. view that unilateral measures at the UN and on the ground will not advance this goal. This General Assembly resolution was no exception, and so the United States voted no. Our vote does not reflect opposition to Palestinian statehood. We have been very clear that we support it and seek to advance it meaningfully. Instead, It is an acknowledgement that statehood will come only from a process that involves direct negotiations between the parties. A path that guarantees Israel's security and future as a democratic Jewish state. There is no other path that guarantees Palestinians can live in peace and with dignity in a state of their own. And there is no other path that leads to regional integration between Israel and all its Arab neighbors, including Saudi Arabia. The United States is committed to intensifying its engagement with the Palestinians and the rest of the region to advance a political settlement that will create a path to Palestinian statehood and subsequent membership in the United Nations. This resolution does not resolve the concerns about the Palestinian membership application raised in April in the Security Council through the Admissions Committee process. And should the Security Council take up the Palestinians' membership application as a result of this resolution, there will be a similar outcome. Additionally, the draft resolution does not alter the status of the Palestinians as a non-member state observer mission. Even this unproductive text makes that explicit. As a result of this vote, the Palestinian non-member state observer mission has not gained the right to vote in the General Assembly. It also has not gained the right to put forward candidates in UN organs or to be elected as a member of the Security Council. In short, the Palestinians' non-member state observer mission does not have the same standing as a member state after this vote. In the meantime, the United States will continue to oppose measures that undermine the prospect of a two-state solution. This includes any actions that violate the principles that Secretary Blinken has affirmed repeatedly, that Gaza cannot be a platform for terrorism, that there should be no Israeli reoccupation of Gaza, and that the size of Gaza's territory should not be reduced. We believe a two-state solution coupled with these elements is the best way to achieve a durable peace in the region, along with security for Israelis and Palestinians. It remains the U.S. view that the most expeditious path toward statehood and UN membership for the Palestinian people is through direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority with the support of the United States and other partners. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the delegate of the United States, and I now invite the distinguished delegate of France to take the floor.
Monsieur le Président,
President,
la France a voté en faveur du projet de résolution proposé par les Émirats arabes unis. Celui-ci confère de nouveaux droits à l'État observateur de Palestine au sein des Nations unies. Les clarifications apportées concernant le droit de vote et le droit d'être élu, qui sont les prérogatives des seuls États membres, sont les bienvenues. La France rappelle que la procédure d'admission d'un nouvel État membre est définie par la Charte qui ne saurait être contournée. Elle est favorable à l'admission de la Palestine comme État membre de plein droit. C'est pourquoi elle a voté en faveur du projet de résolution présenté par l'Algérie au Conseil de sécurité. Il est temps d'inscrire l'action des Nations unies dans la perspective d'un règlement du conflit israélo-palestinien sur la base de la solution des deux États. Celle-ci est la seule à même de répondre aux besoins de sécurité d'Israël ainsi qu'aux aspirations légitimes des Palestiniens à un État. C'est le sens du projet de résolution que la France a présenté au Conseil de sécurité. Nous appelons tous ses membres à le soutenir et à soutenir une perspective de paix. Monsieur le Président, la France condamne l'attaque terroriste du Hamas et d'autres groupes terroristes le 7 octobre dernier. Elle continue d'exiger un cessez-le-feu et la libération de tous les otages. Elle continue d'exiger un accès humanitaire complet. L'offensive qui a débuté à Rafah risque de provoquer de nombreuses victimes et un nouveau déplacement de population, alors qu'aucune zone ne peut être considérée comme sûre aujourd'hui à Gaza. Elle risque de perturber encore davantage l'entrée de l'aide. La France est clairement opposée à cette opération. Elle condamne l'attaque du Hamas contre le point de passage de Kerem Shalom. Elle rappelle que les partis doivent tout mettre en œuvre pour protéger les civils et garantir l'accès de l'aide. Monsieur le Président, il est temps de se mobiliser pour une solution politique. Je vous remercie.
I thank the delegate of France, and I now invite the distinguished delegate of Finland to take the floor.
Finland abstained in the vote on the General Assembly resolution ES10/L30. The tragic events of the past months have once again demonstrated that lasting peace in the Middle East requires a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Finland considers the two-state solution the only sustainable way to guarantee the security and the rights of both peoples and to achieve sustainable peace. The entire international community must strive to advance this goal. Sustainable peace requires the realization of the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination in their own independent state. Finland has been a reliable partner to the Palestinians for decades in supporting the construction of the Palestinian state, both politically and through development cooperation. The international community now needs to create clear steps towards a Palestinian state. Palestine's UN membership is one of these steps. It is of utmost importance that the membership is not merely symbolic, but comes as part of a broad-based plan that produces concrete improvements to the situation of the Palestinians and the security of the whole region. Unfortunately, the international community has not yet agreed on such a plan. Finland wants to see an independent, internationally recognized Palestinian state as a full member of the United Nations as soon as possible. Despite the difficult situation, it is important that all peoples in the region become aware of the necessity of the two-state solution. The leadership of both parties must act in a manner that makes the two-state solution credible in the eyes of the citizens. Mr. President, the protection of civilians must immediately become the highest priority. Israel must stop all its illegal activities in the West Bank and release the Palestinian revenues it is withholding. The Palestinian government needs to implement its reform program. We all must acknowledge openly that there is no return to the status quo ante of 7th of October. Finland continues to call for a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza and the immediate release of all hostages. Ultimately, the benefits of the two-state model clearly outweigh disadvantages for all residents in the region. The peoples of Israel and Palestine deserve a better, secure future, and the Palestinians have the right to take decisions on their own affairs. Thank you, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of Finland, and I now invite the distinguished representative of Australia to take the floor.
I thank you, Mr. President. Australia welcomes this resolution's unwavering support for the two-state solution of Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within recognised borders. This is a clear rejection of the goals and methods of Hamas. A two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, is the opposite of what Hamas wants. We condemn Hamas' terrorist attack on Israel and call for the immediate release of all hostages. Australia has long believed a two-state solution offers the only hope for breaking the endless cycle of violence and achieving lasting peace. Like many member states, Australia has been frustrated by the lack of progress. There is a role for the international community to build momentum, set expectations that parties resume negotiations for tangible progress, and to support efforts for a political process. The resolution does not provide membership of the United Nations and retains the status of the permanent observer mission with a modest extension of additional rights. We appreciated our engagement with Member States and the Palestinian observer mission to ensure that this was clear. The resolution expresses the General Assembly's aspiration for full Palestinian membership of the United Nations, something which must ultimately be recommended by the Security Council consistent with the Charter. While this resolution is not what we would propose, it is for all these reasons that Australia voted yes. Like many other countries, our vote for this resolution is not bilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. Nevertheless, Australia no longer accepts that recognition can only come at the end of the peace process. We have been clear there is no role for Hamas in a future Palestinian state. Such a state cannot be in a position to threaten Israel's security. Reform of the Palestinian Authority is required, and direct negotiations will be needed on final status issues, including Jerusalem and borders. We have listened to Israel's concerns. Australia will always remain committed to Israel's right to exist in peace and security. We believe a two-state solution is the only way to assure this. We know this vote won't resolve the immediate crisis. A humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza is needed urgently. The catastrophic humanitarian situation must be addressed, and Hamas must release all hostages. Thank you.
I give the floor next to the distinguished delegate of Germany, after thanking the distinguished delegate of Australia for his statement. Germany, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Germany firmly believes in two states, Israel and Palestine, for two peoples in the Middle East. We share the goal of a Palestinian state. We fully support Palestinians' right to self-determination. Every child, every family deserves to live in peace, in prosperity, and in dignity, and we want the Palestinian people to have their own state. Germany has worked towards that for years, and we will relentlessly continue to do so. Today, immediate action is required.